Hello and welcome to Make It Happen with Will Polston. I'm Will Polston. This is episode number 37, and in this episode I'm joined by Simon Alexander Ong. Simon is a personal development entrepreneur, coach and public speaker. His clients are from all walks of life, but they share one trait. They all believe that the greatest investments you can make is into yourself. His work has seen him invited onto Sky News and the BBC to be interviewed, while Barclays featured him in a nationwide campaign asking him questions on how families could embrace better lifestyle habits. His insights have seen him featured in HuffPost, Forbes, Virgin and The Guardian. He also regularly speaks at organisations, and these have included Salesforce, Microsoft, EY, Adobe and Unilever, and keynotes, public events and conferences. His debut book, Energise, was published by Penguin in April 2022 and received endorsements from the likes of New York Times best-selling authors Simon Sinek, Marie Forleo and Dr. Marshall Goldsmith. And in this episode, we're going to be discussing how you can be energized and make the most of every moment. Simon, welcome to the show.
Well, thank you so much for having me on today.
Really looking forward to getting stuck in. Now, you have most recently, and I know it's sort of only in the last couple of months, become a bit of an international sensation with the new book that's come out, Energise, which obviously we're going to be talking about. But I think you and I'm really looking forward to this conversation for a few reasons. But one being that you and I are very similar, I believe, in our view on life, on our view on what we want to do day to day in terms of sort of helping people. I talk about getting people to achieve their full potential, and I know you talk a lot about getting people to make the most out of every moment, and that's sort of really key. And we've also got a background that's sort of involved with financial services as well in an interesting way. So I think there's some similarities. There's definitely some differences as well, but we can get into that. But for people that haven't come across you and your book yet, tell us. We've heard the introduction, but why do you do what you do?
If I were to look at the source of this journey, Will, I think it begins in 2008. I was a graduate in the financial services industry, and I had no idea that 14 months after I joined as a graduate, we would be facing a global financial crisis. And so if that didn't happen, we may not be sitting here talking to each other, Will, because what that did is it made me question a lot of the beliefs that I had held growing up in an Asian household. In an Asian household, it was very much about being top of the class, following the traditional path in life, and earning a good salary from very traditional, well-respected jobs such as law, banking, accountancy, and consulting. And because I started to question what I was doing and the beliefs I'd held about what success meant, that is the moment that set me on the path to what I now get to do today. Because I started to realize, especially through that period of reflection, Will, that I had this gift of helping people in times of need. I was that sort of person where if someone was going through a difficult decision, if somebody was going through a personal, professional challenge, they would tend to call me up and say, Simon, do you have half an hour that you can spare? I just want to ask you a few things and ask your thoughts on what I'm going through at the moment. But I never realized that I could monetize that path could actually be something that would turn into a full-time career. So that's where it began. And the why I do what I do, it's because as I started to see the impact that this work can have on the lives of others, it just made me want to do this more, Will, because I think that is what gives life meaning. It's not what we do for ourselves, but it's what we do for others. And to see the changes that they went through, but also the coming home to who they already are and expressing that into the world, it was just beautiful and magic to behold.
And look, I get that for sure. And personally, I've experienced it. I suppose the part that I'm interested in is the moment for you, because it's interesting you mentioned about sort of family history. Am I right in saying, was it your dad that came to the UK originally to come to university here? Is that right? That was
Yeah. So both my both my parents came from Malaysia to study here in the UK. They met at university. So my mum was a nurse, my dad an engineer, and they decided to settle and build a family here in the UK. And so growing up, it was very interesting because I was one of only around 6 or 7 Chinese students, not just in my year, but the whole school. And now when I go back and deliver talks to the students, there's so many people from different backgrounds, colors, nationalities that make up the demographic of the student base. But when I was there, I was by and large a minority. And so that was a fascinating experience.
The reason I ask that is because if I'm only saying that one of the big things, you know, there's a reason I'm bringing this up, was that when you decided that you wanted to sort of go down a different path, let's say, to what let's say the family had valued, because a lot of people that right now that will be listening to this is that they've maybe got a heartfelt passion of something they want to do. They kind of know it, but it's my parents want me to do this, but I'm the 5th generation of, I don't know, whatever it might be, shoemakers, you know, but I don't want to be a shoemaker. I want to be a racing car driver or whatever it is. And because am I right in saying that was kind of that you took that path, and what was it that did you get resistance when you did that? And if you did, what's your advice to anybody that's listening to this right now?
Sure. Well, there was a big mental challenge that went on. And I think anybody who has made that transition from working in a job that you didn't like to starting your own business can relate to, especially when you have parents with high expectations of you. And so initially, when I was exploring the world of coaching and personal development, I shared a little, but I didn't tell them straight away that I was making the transition to doing this full time. Even when I did that full time, Will, I still didn't tell them I was doing it full time. So my dad at the time, he was living abroad. My mum unfortunately passed away when I was 17. So my dad was abroad with his partner. And my dad would call me up and say, Simon, how's work going? Just touching base and showing a bit of interest in terms of my career progression. And I would just buy some time, Will. I would just say, you know, work's going well. I'm still looking for that promotion, but hopefully next year it will come. So I was just kind of biding and buying time until I could build some success, because I knew that unless they saw some elements of success, they would be very critical. They would say things such as, Simon, why did you give up a stable paycheck, health insurance, perks, holiday pay for something in which you have no idea you are going to get paid month to month? And they were right. You know, at the beginning, you don't know if you're going to get paid month to month because you're just starting out and things are very uncertain. And it's interesting, Will, because I started to share with them what I was doing once I started to experience success. And I think that the moment my family really got behind what I was doing was when I started to share some recordings on social media. So I shared a recording of myself being interviewed on BBC Radio, and then the Sky News interview, and in a couple of events that I was speaking at. And then I started seeing them sharing it on their social media. And I said to myself, I think they finally get it. I think they actually are behind me now, and they want me to pursue this and really see what I can make of it.
Yeah, no, good. Well, thank you for sharing that. So look, let's get stuck into a topic that you know very, very well. You've literally written the book on it, which is energy. But the subtitle of the book is making the most of every moment. And because a lot of people, they think of energy and they think of energy in the form of I need energy to exercise, or I want to have a Mars bar to give me a boost of energy. But you don't mean it in that sense, that in that context necessarily. So what does it mean to live an energized life, Simon?
Sure. So first of all, we all know what energy means. We may just come across it in a very different way. So for example, if you are a fan of the Star Wars films, you will have heard of the term the Force. If you practice yoga, you would refer to it as prana. If you're from Maori culture, you would call it mana. If you're from my Chinese culture, you would call it qi. Now, whatever you call it, whatever term you give it, we're all talking about energy as a life force. Now, the thing is, when we look at energy, Will, we tend to focus exclusively on the physical side. Like you said, what am I eating? Am I moving my body? Am I getting enough rest? Am I getting sufficient sleep? That's all to do with the physical side. And the reason we focus exclusively on that is because those are the things that we can see. You know, you can see if somebody needs to exercise more. You can see if somebody needs to get more sleep. And you can see what people are eating. You can see if they're eating junk or they're eating things that are actually going to give them energy. But the other dimensions of energy are the mental, the emotional, and the spiritual. And those three areas are things that we cannot see. Those are the things that are invisible to us outside of the people that we know. But if we begin to focus on those other dimensions, mental energy being our ability to focus on what is most important, emotional energy being how we respond to uncertainty, setbacks, and challenges, and spiritual being about, are we living a life of purpose? Are we doing the things that make us feel alive? In fact, what I've often seen in society around us is that many of us are exhausted, not because we're doing too much, but because we are running someone else's race and measuring our progress using metrics that are not defined or determined by ourselves. And that's what makes us feel exhausted. And that's where many people are spiritually low in energy. So that's what I mean when I talk about energy. And I think that once we begin to address not just the physical, but the mental, the emotional, and the spiritual, what we now have together is a powerful foundation and springboard to take ourselves to that next level.
I wholeheartedly agree, and it's interesting. I'll often have conversations with people about burnout, and people will say to me, I'm burnt out. I've been working too hard. And it's interesting because I actually throw back at them that you don't burn out because you're working too hard. You burn out because you're spending too much time not doing the stuff that you love doing, not doing the stuff that really fires you up, fills you with energy, the things that are highest on your values, your highest priorities. And from what I'm understanding, you that's kind of your view when it comes to energy as well.
Definitely. I mean, if you do something you truly enjoy, you could be doing that work for hours, and those hours feel like minutes. But if you hate what you do, those minutes will feel like hours, and that's what drains us. You know, during the book launch of Energise, well, in the weeks after, I was doing on average 2 to 3 events a day. Now, I felt energized because it was such a thrilling feeling to be able to share that in person with the world. And that gave me energy to see people holding that book, reading it, giving me feedback, connecting with them. But if I was doing something that didn't excite me or give me energy that wasn't aligned to who I was, then after the first day, the rest coming after that would feel like a chore. And that's where I think burnout really comes from. It's not that you're working too hard, it's that you're doing too little of the things that actually bring you joy and make you feel alive.
Absolutely. Now that said, I'm sure you're not delusional, and there are some fundamentals, right? So I refer to the fundamentals as sort of diet and hydration, movement, or we might want to call it exercise, headspace. So for me, that's sort of there's various different ways of creating a maintained headspace, and sleep. What's your view when it comes to what I've labeled the fundamentals that you have in place, and what are some top tips that you might have for people that might be struggling in those areas at the moment?
Sure. So you're right, Will. When I get asked about which of those dimensions, so physical, mental, emotional, spiritual, is the most important to focus on, I always say physical to start. And within physical, there are 3 core pillars that form that. And that is sleep, that is nutrition, and that is exercise. And if we look at the COVID pandemic, what we've seen is the fact that health really is your first wealth. You know, to the healthy, you will have lots of hopes, dreams, and goals, but to the sick, you only have one wish, and that is to be healthy again. And you have seen, or I have seen at least, lots of people during the COVID pandemic and even after the pandemic change their diet, focus on their lifestyle, because they want to outlive the effects of being contracted, having COVID, having this virus. They want to be someone that can overcome whatever the virus throws away. And in order to do so, you've got to have those fundamentals in place. And so if I start with exercise, one of the things that can help us move our bodies more is reflecting on the question at the beginning of the day: how do I want to feel today? How do I want to feel today? Now, if you are writing down to that question, I want to feel energized, I want to feel excited, I want to feel like I'm in a very high peak state of mind, then of course movement always comes into that. And there have been countless studies that show even low intensity exercise on a daily basis contributes not just to a longer life, but also contributes to greater clarity and confidence. Now, who wouldn't want more of that? And with regards to sleep and nutrition, now there's a great insight I learned by reading this medical book when I was researching some notes for putting together Energize. And it talks about how much blood is pumped through our brain. And if we are feeding our bodies junk, then guess what? Junk is getting fed into our brain, and the brain can't make the connections it could make if you were actually feeding your food healthier nutrition. So that gave me a really profound insight that what we feed our body literally contributes to the energy that we have to do what we do. It's why if you eat a carb-heavy lunch, what happens is you're very likely going to feel lethargic, drained, and tired by mid-afternoon. But if you have something that is lighter and healthier for you, your energy levels stay moderately higher than if you didn't. So it's about assessing, what are you eating, and is that contributing to your energy, or is that actually draining you? And the sleep part is fascinating, Will, because when I talk with high achievers, whether they are entrepreneurs, C-level executives, or celebrities, one of the first things that we sacrifice when we are looking to achieve more is our sleep. We mistakenly believe that in order to get more done, I've got to sleep less. But it's a bit ironic, because when we sleep less, we actually get less done, because we're less effective the more that we work and stare at our screens. And so for me, if we want to be our most productive selves, it always begins with sufficient rest and sleep.
So a couple of years ago, I bought this thing. It's called a Whoop. I'm not sure if you're familiar with Whoop or not. And it's a wearable. And at the same time, or about the same time, I always thought I got a good enough sleep. I normally would go to bed about 10 and wake up about 5, right there or thereabouts. And I was finding myself starting to get quite tired. I don't know why. And my diet was okay and all this good stuff. And I got this Whoop, and I was amazed how bad my sleep was, because I sleep through the night. I don't get up. I know everyone says you dream, but 95% of the time I don't recall dreams. It's not like I was waking up in the middle of the night feeling like I've been dreaming all night or having nightmares, and my sleep was so bad. And listening to Matthew Walker's book, Why We Sleep, combined, and it really made me shift my approach to sleep, to the point where I would skip a gym session and getting up early to get an extra lie in, which I wouldn't ever have used to have done if I was having a later night because I was coming in late or something like that. And it really does make the world of difference.
It's so true. And the analogy that comes to my mind as you were speaking, Will, is if any of the listeners have children, they can relate to this. When you have children, if your child does not get sufficient sleep, the world feels like it's going to break down in chaos. Your child is cranky. Your child is going to throw a huge tantrum because they're just running on adrenaline. They need that rest. And the same happens for us as adults. If we're not getting sufficient sleep and rest, guess what? When we have to make those tough decisions or big decisions for our business, for our life, we're going to be very reactive. We're not really going to think things through. And so we've got to be mindful of that if we want to succeed and own our day.
But what about the flip side to that? So what about because I'm not a parent yet. What about the parents that have got young children that are struggling with sleep, and they understand they're maybe the high performers, they might be the business owners, or even if they're not necessarily business owners, a lot of the people that listen to this are business owners, but that they are people that want to operate at a higher level, but they have got a young child or young children around them, and they are really struggling with sleep. What's your advice to them?
Well, for me, first of all, every situation is different. So just to give you some context, some parents will have family around for support. Some parents won't have family around. We will have some single parents listening, and we will have parents who have both partners together. And so depending on the situation, the key is that, especially at the beginning, and I know this from experience because I became a father for the first time in April 2020. At the same time, the UK went into its first lockdown. And in the same month that I received an offer by Penguin to write a 65,000 word book, and having to adapt my business, because all my speaking overnight suddenly just disappeared because no one could hold in-person events. And so I can relate to people trying to get sleep while wanting to achieve all the things they want to achieve. And for me, it's really about understanding that sleep when you're a parent isn't just your nighttime sleep. So when we think about sleep, we just tend to focus on the evening to the morning. But when you're a parent, you got to look at the 24-hour window, because your child is going to sleep throughout the day as well. And so you've got to take advantage of those nap times that your child has during the day to make up for that lack of sleep during the night. And that is just unfortunately something we all have to go through in the early few months when we become parents. Things will get better. Some parents will see their children have better sleep from around 6 to 8 months, some from 12 to 14 months onwards, and some even later. But the key thing is we have to adapt with our child. So because our daughter Will was sleeping great during the day, but not so great at night, we used the daytime to catch up with sleep. And for me, I used those periods of naps to write my book and to get the things done that I needed to.
So power naps, essentially. Take advantage of power naps and use those throughout the day. Good
Definitely,
stuff.
definitely.
So we're speaking about sort of the physical things, like you said, the three areas: health and nutrition, exercise, and sleep. But then we can find ourselves in a situation where we have energetic blocks, so it feels like you're trying to get in an appropriate state. You want to get in an energetic state, but just something's stopping you. You don't know what it is, but you feel like you're just having some sort of block. What do you put that down to and what can people do to overcome those?
Sure. So energetic blocks can come in the form of various things, but more often than not, they come in the form of fears, doubts, negative self-talk, thoughts about scenarios that may or may not happen. Basically, not being in the present. Because if we're so future focused, then we're not living in a moment. We're kind of predicting things that actually are worse than what happens in reality. So those tend to be the things that block us from making progress. If you talk to many people and say, what are you focused on this year? At the beginning of each year, they'll have a list of things that they say, I'm going to do this year. I'm going to finally follow through with this. I'm going to finally change career. I'm going to start that new business. And then you ask them in October, November, coming up to the year end, how have you got on with those things? And most may not have even started, or have started but never kept consistent. And usually what has stopped them is their own thinking about their progress, or their own self-beliefs, their fears and their doubts. And so once we can address those things and understand that at a very fundamental level, we are simply living in the feeling of our thinking, we can then become the sculptor of our reality. We can bend and shape it into something that works for us and not against us.
When we're living in the thinking of our feeling,
in the
can you just in the feeling of our thinking, can you just explain that for the listeners?
So what I mean by this is we don't live in one reality. We don't live in one common reality. Now, the fact is we live in very customized realities. So when an event happens, the way that you interpret it will be very different to the way I do, and very different to your colleague, your friends, or your partner. Now, what that tells us is that we're living in the feeling of our thinking. That is, our thinking is creating our reality. So think of your thoughts as colors on a palette. and the blank canvas is your reality. Now, if you pick bright, vivid colors as your thoughts, guess what? Your reality is going to be very optimistic and very positive. But if you pick dark colors and that is an expression of what is going on in your thought, then guess what? Your reality is going to be very dull, very miserable, very negative. And so once we understand that we are actually the one holding the paintbrush, we can decide to choose new thoughts. And that is a very powerful insight to embrace. Once we do that, we realize that we are literally now painting our reality, and that determines the feeling, the choices, and the behaviors that we make.
So what I'm interpreting from what you're saying there is that it's the choice that we have. So there's an element of choice that comes down to what you choose to believe in any given situation. So it comes back to like, have you got an optimistic or pessimistic outlook? If you choose to believe that something is good for you, then great. If you believe that it's bad, is that the type of thing that you mean?
Definitely. I mean, it also brings to mind, just as I'm speaking to you now, Will, there was a interaction with, I think you come across the psychologist Sid Banks.
Yeah.
But he heard a comment towards him when someone said at a conference in response to him saying, "I feel insecure." And the retort that he got was this: "You only think you're insecure." And that insight provoked his insight into what eventually became the three principles, his teachings that he espoused, because what he realized is that thought he had determined his reality, that he had the power to choose a different thought. And if he chose a new thought, the awareness to do that would then paint a very different reality.
Yeah, one of my favorite quotes is when you change the way you look at things, the things you look at change, and it's that conscious decision. I talk about a distinction between the difference between thoughts and thinking. Yeah. And and I know you do lots and lots of talks all over, but quite often if I'll ask an audience of like, who's had the thought I'm going to run out of money before the end of the month? Who's had the thought I'm cold? Who's had the thought I'm hungry? And every person in the room unanimously puts their hand up. So therefore the thought isn't unique, but it's the thinking, which is the proactive element that we're doing about it, which is the advantage that we have as human beings. We have the prefrontal cortex. We have an ability to think about our thoughts, is what determines what way we go. And once we learn to control that, and there's various different tools, meditation being one of them, that enables us to control, or not necessarily control, but focus is probably the better word, focus our thinking. Then we have the ability to influence it in the same way that we influence ourselves to be able to walk or run when we want to, and walk or run on demand.
Definitely. And that's why when I often get asked what is a great activity to help me become more conscious of my thoughts and the thinking process, for me it is journaling. Because when we journal, what we are doing is we're slowing down and we are reflecting on what is going on in our minds. Now, when we download what is in here onto paper, that is when we can understand how we think. Now, most of us just think without knowing how we think. But once we know how we think, then we can begin to make better choices. We can begin to understand the best path forward. We can begin to understand ourselves better. And that is the beginning of true wisdom. True wisdom always begins with knowing yourself, because you can't know others until you first know who you are.
It's so true. What about your so you mentioned journaling. Do you have a sort of a daily or a regular journaling practice personally?
Yeah. So I started off doing a weekly journal when I began the activity of journaling, just because I didn't know the best way to do it. So I downloaded some questions. At the end of each week, I would review what happened in the week before and plan for the week ahead. And then as I started to get a hang of it, I started journaling on a daily basis. Some days I might journal quite quickly. Some days I might journal longer. But for me, it is the consistency that is the most important.
And do you have particular questions that have you got regular questions that you answer yourself each day, or very, very regularly? Are there similar questions that come up regularly for you?
Sure. So I typically have 3, but outside of that, it will just depend whatever comes from my head. But the 3 I always have in my notebook are, firstly, how can I add value to someone's day to day, however small. Second is, how will I know today will have been a productive day? And the third one is, what am I grateful for today? Now, those 3 would always stay static throughout my journaling. Anything else, they will vary and they would depend on what I'm going through at any given moment.
And your second question that you said there, how will I know that today's been productive? How often do you achieve what you set out to achieve when you write that out?
I would say I end up achieving more, actually,
Right,
than I set out to do, because when I sit down and I ask myself, how will I know today will have been a productive day? That is tapping into one of the habits that Stephen Covey wrote in his book, The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, which is begin with the end in mind. And because I now know what that one thing is that would make today productive, that becomes my focus in the morning of my day, when my energy is at its highest. And that gives me something to tick off. Whereas a lot of us begin the day, we don't know how we're going to measure if today's going to be productive or not. We just have a whole list of to-dos, but it doesn't necessarily mean we've been productive. For me, productive is moving forward, even just by one step to where and who I want to be. Now, the reason I say I often get more done is because once I've done that, that kickstarts momentum. I'm like, well, I've got that thing off my list. I want to do more now. And so whatever I do after that becomes a bit of a bonus.
The reason I ask that is I believe that happiness is equal to or greater than your expectations. If your expectations are met, you're happy. If they're not, then you're unhappy. And most people, they don't really know whether they're happy or not. It's because they haven't clearly defined what their own expectations are. Expectations are of others, expectations of their children, even expectations of themselves, which in this instance is something that you're doing daily and you're identifying what that is. So by you knowing what that is, that then enables you to have a target for you to, it's binary, isn't it? I've either won the day or I haven't, based on what it is that you set out to do. But it's interesting you mentioned productivity, because I know that you also talk about that you shouldn't manage time, but manage your energy, not time. So what do you mean by that?
Sure. So when we think about productivity, most of the time we go, oh, I've got to manage my time better. Now, if we only focus on time management, what that assumes is that our energy is constant throughout the whole day. So some of us might go, okay, I'm going to go to the gym at 4 o'clock. I'm going to do this project at 2 o'clock. I'm going to do this at 9 o'clock tonight. But we are disregarding the fact that we all have different energetic rhythms. And so most of the time, if people put into their diary, I'm going to go to the gym at 4 o'clock. The reason why most don't is because by the time you get to 4 o'clock, you're probably going to be so exhausted, or the weather's raining now, you don't want to go and do it. Yeah. And so if we don't understand our energetic rhythms, then we're not really working with our body, we're working against it. And so for me, if we start to be more aware of our energy levels throughout the day, so some of us may be early risers, some of us may be night owls, again, we're all different. But if we start to become more aware of our levels throughout the day, we can start to schedule things around that data, around that insight. So when your energy level is higher, you do those tasks that require greater thinking or more focus. When your energy is lower, then you can do the more administrative tasks. You can do the things that don't require much energy or attention. And so once we can start building our days and our weeks around that insight, we actually become more productive and efficient.
It's so interesting. So I call them energy hours. You know, what my energy, I'm a morning person. I love cracking up at the middle of the day and smashing out my energy hours. And and this is why I think this links back into productivity really nicely, because I don't enjoy doing emails. You know, it's an administrative task, but I don't like doing it. And if I'm going to do emails, I either smash them out first thing in the morning, or weirdly, I get this extra surge of energy. I don't know why, between like 9 p.m. and 10 p.m. where I'm willing to do them. I don't know why, maybe it's other distractions. But if I haven't done emails from like 12 till 6, I'm not doing emails. You know, it's what might take me 20 minutes to do first thing in the morning, I would drag out over an hour and a half, because it's then I'm using my best energy to do the things that I kind of at least want to do, and can work through those. So yeah, I think it is really, really important. And what are some practical ways that people can do to monitor their energy and find out what their best energy hours are?
Sure. So there's an exercise I suggest in the book, and it's very simple. So if you are keeping a diary or a journal, it's simply just to check in with yourself at different points throughout the day. Now, I offer how I do it in the book is that I segment it into different parts, and I simply just ask myself at that time, how energized am I feeling at the moment? And you can give yourself a score from 0 to 10. And as you start to look back at that data, that will give you insights as to when you feel most energized, when you feel least energized, and perhaps what was the reason behind that. Because it may be you just got back from a long holiday, or you're about to go on holiday, so that whole week you're energized in the build up to the holiday. But then that starts to give you insights for the future. You can start to manage your diary, your calendar, and your workload around that. But if you don't know, then you're just going to be slotting things into your diary left, right, and center.
Yeah, no, very, very wise indeed. Very wise indeed. And then your third question is around gratitude. So how does gratitude affect energy?
For me, well, it is the fastest way to experience an uplift in your mood and energy. You know, often when I run a workshop and people say to me, how can I feel energized right now? Now, apart from sending everyone to the gym, which is not viable, I can't just send a whole workshop of people to a gym. I say, I want you to do this exercise, which will give you the experience of feeling how different your energy is going to be by the time we finish. And the exercise is simply 3 steps. The first is to write down one person that you can be truly grateful for, the first name that comes in your head. Second is to write down why in as much detail as you can. And the third is to pick up the phone, call that person, and tell them exactly what you wrote down. Now, if you're not comfortable calling that person, at a minimum, send them a voice note, reading out exactly what you wrote down. Now, the reason this energizes us is because it reminds us just how much we already have. Because when we're living from a place of not gratitude, then guess what? We're always focused on lack. We're always focused on why me. We're focused on the fact that there's so much more that you want to get in the world. Whereas when you focus on gratitude, you actually realize that the world is abundant, that there are people, things, places, and resources you already have at your disposal, but you just haven't shown the appreciation of it. I mean, I'm referencing the COVID pandemic again, but I do because so many people became so appreciative and grateful for the things that we took for granted. I mean, if we look back, I mean, just even hugging a friend, seeing your parents, traveling, going to a restaurant and having a nice meal. I mean, these things we sorely missed for a couple of years, and we became grateful for them because we realized how important they were and how nice of a luxury it was in our life.
So true. So true. And I love the think of the person that you're grateful for, you know, like let alone telling them, but just thinking about it and the reasons why and drilling into that is really powerful. So I don't feel that we could have a conversation about energy without touching on a very particular topic. And the reason for it is because we talk about that everything is energy and energy is everything, and that's so true. But there's something that a lot of people will refer to, and a lot of people, particularly that listen to this, that are in business, will have this as something of significant importance to them, which is money. Because people say that money is just an exchange of energy.
Indeed.
So how can people, by being energized, have an impact on them financially? And how can people think, based on what we were talking about earlier, about money in a way that will energize them, not deflate them?
Sure. Well, you're right, Will. Money is simply energy. Money is energy. And when we think about our mental well-being, you know, there's a lot of focus these days on mental health, but I think you cannot talk about mental health without also understanding people's attitudes to money. Because your relationship with money can have a significant impact on your mental health. If you're not great at managing money, you're in debt, you have a lot of interest to owe the credit card companies, then of course your mental health is going to suffer. And there's a great exercise I did at a workshop before to explain how a relationship with money impacts the flow of money. So I said to the audience, when you think of rich people, what comes into your mind? And I just got a whiteboard, I split it into two, and words started to come out from the audience, and I would put them into one of two columns. So people would say things such as lucky, hard workers, deserved, greedy. All these different words came out from me describing rich people. And I would put them into two columns. One would be so-called positive words, one would be negative words. And once we did that, I then asked a follow-up question to the audience. I said, raise your hand if you want to be rich. Now, of course, everybody's hand goes up because they want lots of money, they want to be wealthy, they want to be rich. And I said, have you noticed a bit of a contradiction here? On the one hand, some of you in the audience think that rich people are these adjectives, which are very negative. But on the other hand, you also want to be the very same people who you say are greedy, who are lucky. What is that telling you? Basically, don't really want it because you think badly about them. And so that's the misalignment we have with your relationship with money itself. And so for me, understanding our relationship with money is how we begin to change our energy with it. So once we develop a better relationship with it and we come, we show up each day with a different level of energy, what happens is we begin to attract opportunities that allow us to monetize our skills and our gifts.
So this comes back to the belief then, right? So if these people's belief, what they believe about money, if they believe that people with money are, because I can only imagine, you're in that seminar, you're doing the exercise, and you go, right, well, what is it? It's greed. It's people. They're disloyal. They're scoundrels. They're whatever it is. All the words that you were just talking about. And then you go, right, quick show of hands. Who wants to be greedy? And no hands go up. And right, and who wants to be a scoundrel? And no one's hand goes up. Right, who's now hands up? Who wants to be rich? And then the hand goes up again. Right, can you see the conflict? I can imagine it playing out just like that. So what do those people then do? If that's someone right now who's actually, do you know what I kind of do? I'm kind of resentful. I drive past people, I see them in their nice car or in their nice home, and I think, oh, you must be really greedy. You must shit all over people or whatever it is that they might have as their thing. What can they do to change that belief to improve their relationship with money and therefore as an impact potentially improve their mental health?
Sure. Three things come to mind here. Well, the first is to reconnect with your vision. What I mean by this is what we begin to understand is the vision, whatever that is for us, is ultimately what is the most important. And money tends to be mixed up with that. So many of us think that money should be a goal we should aim for. Like, what is your vision? Oh, I want to be a millionaire. Now, that isn't really a valid goal or vision, because what we come to realize is that money is just fuel. Money is fuel, but fuel to what? And unless we know what that destination is, then money doesn't really have a purpose. And that is why when many people win the lottery, they lose it or end up in a lifestyle that is worse than before they won that wealth. And that's because there's no purpose to the money. They don't know where that money is going to go towards. And so for me, first is understanding, well, what is it you are working towards and how will money help you get there? Now that gives money a purpose. That gives money a role in that journey towards where you want to be. Second, for me, is to understand that money is an enabler. What can it enable you to do in terms of what you would like to achieve? Now, a lot of us think money is freedom. Not really. Otherwise, we would look at the rich people and say every rich person should be happy, but you and I know not every rich person is happy. Money is simply an enabler, and it allows us to make better choices. Now, that is why when I work with people, I always want to understand what is the lifestyle that they want to make real. What is that lifestyle that is important to them? And again, that comes back to the vision, but it allows them to see how money can be that enabler. And the third for me goes back to this relationship with money. is when we look at those rich people, the people driving the sports cars, or the people traveling in luxury, or the people who look like they have it all, is not to look at the things that most people envy, which is the exterior and the materialism, but instead is to look at how did they get there? Look at them with curiosity, not with envy. And that, I think, can change the relationship we have with not just money, but wealth in general. So whenever I went to seminars when I was early in my journey, I would want to codify how people did what they do. So when I went to a Tony Robbins event, I saw lots of people in the audience. They were sitting there with their notepads and they were writing down all the content. Now, the content was great, don't get me wrong, but what I was more interested in was, how did he start the presentation? How did he finish? What stories did he use? How many stories did he use? When did he walk into the audience? Why did he walk into the audience? How did he engage? So I really wanted to break down how that person got to where they were. So that's what I would say. Switch your focus from envy to curiosity, and that's where you're going to learn a lot more.
Love that. Love that. What I would love to know before we round up, because you've done a wealth of studying around not just energy, but personal and professional development. If you could go back to 15-year-old Simon and tell him, give him 3 lessons, that kind of things that you wish you knew when you were 15, that you know now, that would have made life easier, better, or whatever you want to define it to be, what would those 3 things be?
First thing would be, diversity is power. Now, here's what I mean by that. If I look at what has helped me in the last couple of years, it has been because my environment and the people I spend time with have been truly diverse. So, for example, in the last couple of years, I've had the opportunity to spend time with the bartender of the world's best bar at the Connaught Hotel in London, a BBC film director, a musician, a Michelin star chef, a tech entrepreneur, a Middle East government official. Now, what that does, Will, is that it stimulates my creativity. It allows me to think different. You know, when I did my book launch, knowing the bartender at that bar, we were able to partner. And he designed a cocktail inspired by my book. Because I knew the BBC film director, we then shot a video trailer for my book. Because I knew someone from the crypto and Web3 community, we put together one of the world's first book launches in the metaverse. Now, that's what I mean by diversity is power. And so what I would share with that 15-year-old Simon is diversify your inputs. You know, outside of school, how can you learn from people from different backgrounds, different cultures, different locations, different interests? Because that is going to feed your creative energy. That is going to give you the ability to think different from the majority. So that would be the first thing I would share. The second I would share is to collapse that gap between idea and execution, because so many of us have such a long gap between that idea moment and that execution. And especially when you're 15, Simon, you've got the time, you've got the ability to collapse that gap because you don't have all the other things that come later in life. So collapse the gap between idea and execution, and that will accelerate your learning curve, because you're going to learn far more from putting things into action than dwelling on those ideas. And the third thing would be, and this is more of a spiritual thing, the third thing would be listen to your heart more over seeking validation from other people. Because while your heart may not always lead you to where you want to be, it will always lead you to where you need to be. And in time can become just the guide that you need in life.
Lovely. Well, thank you very much for sharing those. So Simon, for people that have been listening to this and going, right, I need to learn more about energy. I want to know how I can be more energized. Where can people connect with you? Where can people get the book? Where can people find you?
Sure. So the website for the book is getenergisebook.com. That is Energise with a Z. And my website is simonalexanderong.com. I'm on all the socials, but the 2 that I use the most are LinkedIn and Instagram. My handle on Instagram is @SimonAlexanderO.
Wonderful. So, guys, go and connect with Simon on those various different platforms and go and get the book and head to the website. We'll put those links in the show notes so you can head straight to them now and go and grab those. Simon, thank you very much for joining me on the show. It's been an absolute pleasure having you as a guest and chatting all things energy. I wish you the best with the rest of the push on the book launch as that's unfolding. I see you constantly out there doing your thing, which is wonderful to see. And thank you. And for everybody that's been listening, until next time, make it happen.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Make It Happen with Will Polston podcast. Make sure you join Will's free Facebook group, the Make It Happen community. Please support the show by subscribing on iTunes, Spotify, Stitcher, SoundCloud or Google Play. Share this episode with at least one friend you think would benefit from it and give Will a 5-star review wherever you download your podcasts. Until next time, make it happen.